Wrapped in absolute darkness, warm blood spills onto my cheeks, my hair, my skin. Chunks of human flesh rain down on me. Make it stop! Pitter patter, pitter patter. There's no end to the deluge. The smell of death fills the air. I'm struck with a wave of nausea so strong I can't hold back the contents of my stomach. But when my mouth opens to vomit, blood pours into it. Let go of me. I can do better than that. My God. Oops. Let go of me. Slightly better, I suppose. Dead bodies grab at my ankles, dragging me down. To where? Hell? Or to the mountain of corpses? Now do you understand that there was a time, if but briefly, when I was happy, when I felt human emotions? But I wish I never had. If I had remained confined in my daughter of God shell, then I doubt I would have felt so much terror at the sight of death. Sorry. Hit my mic. I can't say anything in response. I can't form words. I feel what she experienced, the massacre she witnessed, the limp flesh piling up around her. Even more than twice her age, it's enough to drive me mad. The fact that a 12-year-old girl had to experience something so unspeakable devastates me. Tell me, my dear, do you pity me? Do you sympathize with me? If you feel bad for me, then you'll remain with me. You'll feel my pain and my despair with me, won't you? The witch's cackle echoes through the pile of bodies. There's not a speck of light, and hideous death lingers everywhere. Helpless to resist, I'm dragged down into a deep, dark ocean, an ocean of blood. Need water. Now, on with the story. I was at a complete loss for some time after that. I didn't want to return to the city because I knew there was no one left who would take me in. There was only the Lord, who had bound me and drained me of my blood. So I wandered the roads, no destination in mind, and nothing to defend myself but the clothes on my back. Frankly, I'm rather surprised I wasn't attacked by bandits. After walking for days without food or water, my mind was hazy and my exhaustion at a peak. In the distance, I saw a lake. So driven by my thirst, I turned my unsteady feet toward the water, not caring that it took me off the main road. And it turned out that that was the correct choice, because there was a small cottage beside the lake. That's a weird thing to say, not caring that it took me off the main road. it's pretty understandable that water would be the primary concern, not straying off a road that is in sight of said water. That's odd to me. Oh, that wasn't a period. And it turned out that was the correct choice, because there was a small cottage beside the lake, smoke rising from I'm sounding a bit like the maid. Smoke rising from the chimney, telling me it wasn't abandoned. Out of sheer desperation, I knocked on the door. No one answered. The door wasn't locked, so I slowly, hesitantly pushed it open. And beyond it, I found an old woman, sitting dead in a chair. The woman was a witch, by trade, that is. It appeared she had a deep knowledge of medicinal herbs, using it to make an assortment of medicines. In her cabinets were dozens of small glass bottles containing dried powdered leaves and crushed berries, among other things. On the fire was a cauldron, liquid bubbling inside. The woman looked as though she was asleep. Presumably she had passed away of old age, for there was no sign bandits had been rooting through the cottage, and she had a look of absolute serenity on her face. Looking over at the woman's dead body, what? Oh. Christian shit. Looking over at the woman's dead body, I didn't cross myself. I envied her. Dragging the woman's body by her feet, I dumped her into the lake. Do you think doing so makes me a bad person? Makes me unsightly, unsaintly? Well, I didn't have anywhere else to go, and the owner of the cozy cottage was no longer of this world. There was no reason I couldn't fill the home in her stead, was there? I deserved to have somewhere I felt comfortable, after everything I'd been through, didn't I? And so I took up residence in the old witch's cottage, and remained there until my 16th year. By 16, a terrible cynicism had taken root in my heart. I had no trust for people. I shut them out, building high walls around myself. After such a tumultuous, bloody childhood, it was all I could do to protect myself, to keep my young spirit from cracking. Nevertheless, travelers would, on occasion, pay the old witch's cottage a visit, seeking her medicines. Whenever someone arrived, I would cautiously crack the door open, telling them they could trade for whatever they wanted with food, and never showing my face. One day, a young man showed up at the cottage. My sister has fallen very ill, and she desperately needs medicine. He was very soft-spoken. There was a distinct kindness in his voice which I thought unusual, curious. What kind of person could he be? What did he look like? What expressions did he make as he spoke? To satisfy that curiosity, I snuck a peek at him through the crack in the door. He was a handsome young man with flowing, flaxen hair, and upon seeing me, he didn't flinch back in disgust. He smiled. According to him, his younger sister had fallen gravely ill, and though they had tried a number of remedies, she was still bedridden. The medicines I gave him had no effect. The medicines I gave him, too, had no effect, but he persisted in his quest, visiting me again and again for new combinations to try. He wanted nothing more than to relieve even the slightest bit of his sister's suffering, and, moved by his dedication to his family, I too wanted to do anything I could to help. For the first time in years, my world encompassed more than my small cottage. When the young man came, he would ask not only for medicine, but to go on walks with me. He volunteered to spend time with me, despite my horrifying appearance. It's not healthy to stay holed up inside all the time. You've got this beautiful lake right here. What do you say we take a little walk around the shoreline? He said with a smile, taking me by the hand. We spoke as we circled the lakeside. His voice was always soft and pleasant, like a ray of light shining through a crack in the walls. When I was with him, I felt like I could be an actual person, an ordinary girl. He talked about his sister more than anything, and whenever he did, he was at his brightest and most melancholy. The young man had been a member of a noble house, but disputes over who was the rightful heir had forced him and his sister out. Shortly after that, his sister had fallen ill and was now bedridden. I'll take anything at this point to make her better. I'll even take a miracle if I can get one. That word muttered beneath his breath sparked my memory. I was a saint. My blood had healing properties. I had no reason to hesitate. Someone needed my help, and who deserved it more than this kind-hearted young man's sister? So I decided to tell him who I really was, that my blood had miraculous powers, that it had saved people. At the moment I had been born, the drought plaguing my village had come to an end. That I had been known as a saint, the daughter of God. I told him everything. And he believed it all. He led me to his house, where a pale, sickly young girl lay in bed. She was a sweet little girl, with the same flaxen hair as her brother, who looked like she would have been quite spirited, if not for her ailment. I was touched to see the two siblings sitting there together, quietly holding each other. I would gladly give my blood for the two of them, and so I made a new cut on my arm, which had healed considerably thanks to the slave and the women of the brothel, and let the girl drink of my blood. Neither of them had any doubts about my sainthood, and because they believed, a miracle occurred. The flaxen-haired girl recovered enough to get out of her bed. I was extremely proud of myself. I felt like for once I had actually saved someone's life. The only issue was, she didn't make a complete recovery. For a few days after drinking my blood, she was in good health, but her condition quickly regressed. I was deeply perplexed by this. A miracle had undoubtedly taken place, but it was only temporary. Now, though, I believe I can explain what happened. Her recovery was nothing more than a placebo effect caused by her faith. Would Michelle understand what that word means? Is placebo named after someone? I don't remember. No, if it would be, then it would be capitalized, right? I don't know. In any case, I believe that is a term that came, like, in the 20th century? Right? I think. And Michelle hasn't seen the 20th century yet. I don't know. But that's something I couldn't have known at the time. I mean, suspension of disbelief, they use the modern parlance throughout this entire game. That's just suspension of disbelief. But when you start bringing in specific terms like placebo, like gravity, like vampires, ham sandwich, that's when things get a bit shaky. We were all three perplexed, and we were all three disheartened. Nevertheless, I was prepared to give her my blood as many times as needed. Whenever her condition worsened, The young man came to request more, and never once did I turn him away. On the contrary, I enthusiastically offered her my services. Over time, though, the hope in his eyes began to fade. He asked me on fewer walks, and he seemed hesitant to look me in the eye. I assume it was out of discomfort, out of guilt, out of shame about asking for blood. Ooh. But I don't think his concerns were for me, rather himself and his sister. As I mentioned earlier, blood was considered unclean in our time. And not only was I giving mine away, I was having his sister imbibe it. Looking at it that way, it would hardly be a surprise for him or anyone else to think what I was doing depraved. As time passed, the flaxen-haired young man seemed to grow more and more disturbed by me. That was what I got for opening up. That was what I got for letting his kind, warm his kind, warm light shine in on me. The moment things went bad, he pulled away. There were times when I thought I shouldn't have done anything in the first place, but regardless, I held fast to my original decision. I would put myself on the line for them. No one else. Just them. Even if he was afraid of me or had no interest in seeing me, I would continue offering her my blood. And I was firm in my resolve. One day, though, I received a new visitor. The young man was still the only one I would show my face to, the only guest I had let into my walls. So as usual, I took the man's request from behind the cottage door. But I could hardly believe my ears when he began speaking. "Are you the witch with the miracle blood?" First, how did he know my blood had powers? Second, why had he called me a witch and not a saint? Third, why did he sound like the man who had slaughtered the slave carriage? I told the man he had to leave, that I would not be opening the door for any reason. In response, he said, "I am in need of your blood. Could you not spare a little?" My blood was for the sick and needy. I would never spare a drop for a murderer like him. And I told the man exactly that, demanding he leave. All I could think about was the pile of bodies, the fountain of blood. The man drenched in crimson, wearing a ghastly smirk. I trembled behind the door, fearing he may go on another such rampage. But instead he gave a simple, "as you say," and went on his way. I let out a deep sigh of relief, which is when I realized tears were rolling down both of my cheeks, like an ordinary girl. 3 days later, the flaxen-haired boy showed up at my cottage. "I'm sorry for being so distant lately. I want to talk things over." Those 2 sentences were like a light shining from above. I wanted to talk to him too. I wanted to take a walk around the lake and listen to him talk about nothing. I wanted to experience the warmth of his world once more, and I wanted to tell him about the terrible man who had been there a few days earlier, about how scared I had been. I wanted to tell him it would be all right. "I want to talk to you too," I said, opening the door without a second thought. The light of the sun was so bright all I could make out was his silhouette. I couldn't see the look on his face, or the look in his eyes. A gentle breeze blew past, and my mind froze. How could this be happening? What did it mean? Why? How? What was that man doing, standing behind him? Why was he carrying a sword? Why was he coming into my house? And why did he swing it down, severing my arm? I was in a daze. I couldn't make sense of anything. I didn't want to. My left arm fell to the floor before I even knew what was happening, and then my legs gave out. The pain, searing and unbearable, came a few moments later, as I was lying in an ever-expanding pool of my own blood. I did something then that I hadn't done before, that I had resisted doing no matter how much blood the Lord had stolen from me. I screamed. It was a hideous, visceral noise, a sound I had never thought a saint could make, the same ear-splitting howl the slaves had made as the man had butchered them. I writhed, I wailed, I wept. I crawled across the floor through my own blood. I begged and I begged and I begged for my life. The man walked over and picked up my severed arm, and then, shockingly, he tossed it to the kind-hearted young man, after which he said, "That's your share. Should last you long enough." Share? What did he mean by share? What was he talking about? Why had he given my arm, and why had he taken it? Why was he talking like they knew each other? Why? I had spared blood for him when he asked, hadn't I? So why was he doing this? Was cutting off my arm and stealing it easier on his conscience than simply asking? You understand how I felt, don't you? You can put yourself in my shoes, can't you? The young man refused to look me in the eye. Holding my bloody arm in his trembling hands, he fled from the cottage as quickly as his legs would allow. The man then walked over and picked me up. I had neither the strength nor willpower to resist. Holding me in his arms, he began to speak, telling me things I didn't want to know, things I didn't want to hear, but he didn't care. Nothing personal. I just need your blood. Without it, she'll lose her church. Don't take it personally. Tell me, is there anyone in this world who wouldn't feel a bit of spite after being put through such torture? How was I supposed to let that slide? No one's that much of a saint. My trust had been betrayed, and I was supposed to turn the other cheek. A man had barged into my home uninvited and cut off my arm, and I was supposed to smile and take it? Is there anyone anywhere who doesn't feel even the slightest bit of hatred ever? Is there anyone in this world who could just laugh and brush off this level of abuse? Tell me, is there? How could I not hold a grudge? How could I not despise them? How could I possibly forgive them? Tell me, please. Tell me, how could I? She needs the money. I needed some way of getting enough money to keep her church running. So the Lord made me an offer. If I brought him the witch with the miracle blood, he would finance a whole new church for her. The Lord. Why him again? Why couldn't he leave me alone? After trying to kill me during one of his blood sabbats, why was he after my blood once more? He had learned it really did have miraculous powers, and had he learned it really did have miraculous powers and decided he wanted me back? You get to be the sacrifice, to keep her church from collapsing, to keep her world from collapsing. Sacrifice? Excuse me, what? And what's all this keeping her church from collapsing? You murdered a carriage full of innocent people, and you're trying to protect a church? You! Are you out of your mind? Churches are where people go to commune with God, to speak with my Father. How dare you soil those sanctified grounds with your filthy hands, you beast! It's insulting, sacrilegious, repulsive. Just what do you think you are? So don't take it personally, witch. I'm not a witch. I'm a saint. I was a saint. My blood exists to do the Lord's work, not to satisfy the avarice of men. Why is this happening to me? The man brought me back to the city, but instead of taking me to the Lord's manor, he brought me to a church on the city's outskirts, though to be honest it looked more like an estate than a church. The church also served as a hospital, offering free care to less fortunate children, the poor and the infirm. That was when I learned he had said they needed money. That was when I learned why he had said they needed money. The owner of the church offered unconditional assistance to anyone who came. Even when food and supplies ran low, they would ration their own in order to keep helping others. As a result, the church was perpetually on the verge of collapse. The church was run by a woman, something exceedingly rare for the time. There were no priests. All management was handled by a single nun, who everyone referred to as the saintess. I was the saint. Why was this woman, who didn't have the ability to perform miracles, being worshipped like she did? Why did the people of the city idolize her? Why were the smiles all directed at her? Why was I not in her place? The man carried me to the top of the observation tower. I was there. It was there that I had my reunion with the Lord. I was to spill my blood for the people of the city, but also for the Lord's profit. He was not offering free aid, but selling it as medicine. He claimed it was a miracle elixir, telling no one that it was actually my blood. It was mixed with a beautiful red wine, and drinking it would cure you of any ailment. If they knew it was actually the blood of a witch, they would think it unclean. They would fear it. I remained imprisoned for a long, long time. In the beginning, the swordsman guarded me, though before long, the flaxen-haired young man showed up as well. Presumably one severed arm wasn't enough to keep his sister healthy for long. In listening to their conversations, I learned that to ensure no one else could get in, the observation tower was sealed with 3 locks. The Lord, the swordsman, and the young man each held one of the keys. I was their secret, locked away in the tower for them to drain of blood. Locked away in the tower for them to drain of blood away from wandering. What? I was their secret, locked away in the tower for them to drain of blood away from wandering eyes. Okay. Time went on, and I grew progressively weaker. I lost the will to eat and the will to live. My only view from the tower was the clouds through a window high up on the wall. Occasionally, a pigeon would fly in, sometimes a butterfly, and I would glare in envy as it fluttered around, free to come and go as it pleased. And soon it was spring. Every spring, the church held a festival to pray for the coming year's harvest and the people's well-being. I could hear the bustle from far below through the window as everyone rushed to prepare. I heard the flaxen-haired girl's voice, who had regained her health drinking my blood. I heard the brother's voice, who had betrayed me. I heard the nun's voice, who played saint in my stead. I heard the barbaric swordsman's voice, who had chopped off my arm. And I heard the Lord's voice, the root of all my suffering. I heard people praising the saintess, though I, the true saint, was locked in the tower. I heard people thanking the Lord for his generous donations and miracle medicine, though it had all come from me. Propped up on my suffering, they cheered and clinked glasses of my bloody wine. Those merry, peaceful, cheerful, spirited sinners' voices resounded in my tower. And at noon on the day of the festival, the church bell tolled. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and with the 12th chime, I died. As the bell's last pealing faded into silence, the tower door swung open. Standing on the other side of it were the 3 men. They must have wanted to drain a little more from me to use in the feast, but they arrived at the worst possible moment. The flaxen-haired young man was the first to express his consternation. Why, I never wanted her to die. Was she not eating? The Lord gave my corpse a casual glance and said stone-faced, "Seal the tower off. Understood, no one finds out about this." How can you be so calm? Do you understand what you've done? Pinning the blame on me. How nice it must be to be able to distort reality with panic. The swordsman, who had been silently observing the Lord and the boy conversing, interjected. "You're just as guilty as any of us." Not only did they not mourn my death, they argued over whose fault it was. There was no regret, no remorse. The young man muttered absent-mindedly, I never wanted her to die. What did his intentions matter, though? It was his betrayal that had ultimately tethered me to this mansion. But the fact that they didn't grieve my death, and instead squabbled amongst themselves like filthy rats, was the final straw. How could I not despise them? I don't believe I actually had the power to perform miracles when I was alive. It was all faith, the illusion of belief. I was neither a saint nor a witch. The blood wine was only effective because people placed their faith in the other saintess. I was only ever human. But then, in that moment, an actual miracle occurred. My father bestowed upon me his power. Or perhaps it was the devil who lent me his strength. I was looking down upon my own dead body, my own wretched self. There was nothing beautiful about the pile of bones I had become. I could almost smell the rotting flesh. That was once a saint? I laughed at the thought. It was absurd, ridiculous, and infuriating. They would pay. Those who had cast me into this hell, who had mocked me, who had done this to me, who had made a witch out of me. Hatred coursed through me. Revulsion at everyone on these grounds still smiling. They would know just whose dead shoulders their little party was resting upon. If they wanted so badly to call me a witch, then a witch I would be. I would kill them, every last one of them, place a curse on their souls. And so I made my wish. Most people might consider it a curse, but to me it was most certainly a wish. And my father, or maybe the devil, granted that wish. From the garden there rose a scream. The flaxen-haired young man knew that voice better than anyone. He went deathly pale, darting down the spiral staircase until he reached a window. A young girl was on her knees, vomiting blood in the grass. The young man let out a yelp as he descended the remainder of the staircase. As soon as he reached the garden, he lifted the girl in his arms, but she had already perished. Realizing this, he cried to the heavens, saying the one thing he should have kept to himself. The witch killed her. The blood of the witch killed my sister. That wine you're drinking is no medicine. It's the blood of the witch. You're all drinking witch blood. Crushed by the loss of his only family, the young man picked up a silver fork and plunged it into his own throat, ending his life. Naturally, there was an uproar. Goblets of wine crashed against the earth in rapid succession, as the people holding them fell to the ground and vomited or convulsed. The nun was the first target of their outrage. What she had claimed to be medicine had turned out to be blood, an unclean substance. The blood of a witch, no less. A servant of the church, a servant of the Lord, had given her followers blood to drink, and at this their indignation surged uncontrollably. The people surrounded her, tying her up and throwing her to the ground. As they prepared to inflict righteous justice upon her, the swordsman soared down the stairs and into the garden, plunging his blade into anyone standing near the nun. The cries of agony ringing through the church grounds were ear-splitting. It was no longer a place of God, but hell on earth. Hell built up by the hands of man. Hell painted red with the blood of their brothers. The people armed themselves with anything they could find and went after the man. As much of a beast as he may have been, he stood little chance against such numbers. It is the fate of a beast to be exterminated by those he terrorizes. Once he was gone, the nun had no one left to protect her. She too was consumed by their frenzy. All that remained was an inextinguishable inferno. Hysteria and despair, madness and outrage, and no outlet for it. It was a revolt that made the slaves' uprising at the Lord's manor look like a game. Eventually, their rage found a new target, the Lord. It was only natural, for he was the true villain. He was the one who had given money and the witch's blood to the church. He was the one who had profited off it. And above all, people often resented those who stood above them, particularly in times of unrest. The city resounded with cries for the Lord's head, and he looked down upon it all from the safety of the observation tower. He could do nothing but watch as his domain burned. I can only imagine how painful that must have been. But before long, having seemingly made his peace, he began descending the spiral staircase. He opened the door at the bottom, revealing himself to his people. But before the door had swung all the way open, before he had had a chance to say his final words, someone ran a blade through his chest. With that, the raging furor mostly settled down, but it was hardly the end of the destruction. Mere days later, a plague befell the city. Dreadful black spots covered the flesh of the infected. They writhed in pain, screaming and vomiting blood. Ghastly howls echoed through the streets, as though the whole city had been possessed. It became a cursed land. In their diseased haze, the people muttered again and again, "We have been cursed by the witch." In less than a week, the entire city was dead. My body was left abandoned at the top of the observation tower, and as if to seal the curse away, in their final days, the people shuttered all the windows, wrapping the house in darkness. It's possible that was no miracle either. You can easily explain what happened to them. Locked away for so long in that dirty tower, maybe I caught some kind of disease. And then, when the people drank my blood, they too were infected. Hardly anything out of the ordinary about that. The first to die, the girl, had already been ill. Her body merely chose the worst possible time to yield to her ailment. That was what had happened. That was all that had happened. Indeed, it was nothing more than a fluke, an improbable stroke of luck, an unbelievably unfortunate accident for the city and those 3 men, and an indescribably fortunate accident for myself. But I wish to believe it was a miracle, that even if my blood didn't have healing properties, and even if I wasn't a saint, my wish, my curse, was what caused that uprising. And that was my miracle, granted to me by God or the devil. I choose to believe that, and that my miracle took on its true form thereafter. My curse had brought death upon the 3 men, but for whatever reason, my rancor was far from sated. They had died. So what? Death is but a transient agony. It's nothing compared to what I went through. So I made my next wish. I wished for their reconstruction. I wished eternal suffering on their souls. I wished to trap them in a never-ending cycle of pain and hatred. This was my wish for the flaxen-haired young man. He treasured his dear sister, and he desired a quiet life. So I wished for him to have just that. And I wished for his dearly beloved sister to love him more than anything in the world. For his world to be destroyed by a love gone too far. This was my wish for the beast-like man. He was conscious of his tendency for violence, and he yearned to be more human. So I had his inner beast toned up just a little. I saw to it that he would never be human, so he would never have the peace he so desired. My wish for the Lord was more straightforward. He seemed to have a great affection for wealth and authority, so I ensured those were the only things he could never have. Who needs love or friendship when you could be drowning in power? Oh, that those were the only things he could ever have. Who needs love and friendship when you could be drowning in power? Once he had lost everything, his solitude would be his only companion. Wishes can come true, as long as you always hold fast. Never stop wishing, never surrender. They can come true. Eternal suffering on all their souls, an endless cycle of reconstruction and unavoidable tragedy. Tell me, my dear, do you sympathize with me? Will you curse them with me? Will you take my hand and revile them with me?